Going to hear, believe it or not, Representative Cordeli's bill on HB 1586. The bill that is on your calendar scheduled for 10:30 is House Bill 1587. And that bill was heard, the sponsor introduced it Thursday afternoon, February 13th. And there was testimony received and the hearing was closed. And so that remove that bill from at the 10:30 time slot and instead insert the continued public hearing of House Bill 1508. Okay? So, the schedule reads as follows: 10 o'clock, House Bill 1586, 10:30, House Bill 1508. And then we have executive session scheduled for 1 o'clock this afternoon. And Representative Ladd has scheduled
1239, which is implementation of education standards. That subcommittee meet immediately following, probably the 2 o'clock or immediately following our executive sessions this afternoon. And 1508, terminating participation in the Common Core Ed standards. So those two bills will be in subcommittee this afternoon, immediately following the executive session.
And who's on that subcommittee?
Representative Grenier, Representative Guile,
Fraser,
Miley.
Are there any questions relative to that? I apologize for the... Representative Grenier?
Whereas we've eliminated the 10:30, are we going to be strictly starting at 10:30 with 1508, or are we? Yes. Okay.
And it'll allow a little more time, because we have still have a number of speakers relative to 1508, and we're going to try to get them all. We have to get them all.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, with that, I will open the hearing on 1586, House Bill 1586, which is relative to student and teacher information protection and privacy, and welcome Representative Cordeli to a different seat in the Education Committee.
Hot seat. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, fellow committee members. For the record, Glenn Cordeli, representing Tuftonboro, Moultonboro, and Sandwich. And 1586 is all about student and teacher data protection and privacy. Security breaches, been in the news practically every day with NSA and Target and Hannaford's. Some of the education problems haven't been as widely publicized. For instance, Florida Department of Education exposed the records of over 40,000 people for weeks due to a mistake in the file transfer. Or a California middle school that sold confidential student information in order to get funds to buy a new stage and lighting for the visit of Secretary Duncan to their school. Security and privacy. We've talked about it with Common Core or Smartest Balance. This bill tries to do something about it. And why? There are a number of reasons, starting with the loosening of FERPA, the Federal Education Records Protection, in 2008 to 2011. There was grants, of which New Hampshire got a grant to build a large statewide state longitudinal data system from 2009 stimulus funds. Something called the Common Education Data Standard, which all the states are using, a common format, common data elements. Not all states are using the same data elements, though. I'll put that caveat there. But the list goes on, the reasons that we need to be concerned about confidentiality and privacy. I've heard that it said that this isn't happening in New Hampshire, or that I trust our commissioner and our Department of Education. I believe that legislation is not just about what is happening now or not happening now, but what might happen tomorrow. We have to think about that in our legislation. So let's take a look at some of the key provisions of this bill. On page 2, you'll see a section for data inventory and policies. Something called a data dictionary, which is a listing of data elements that will be maintained and kept by the state. And this is a recommendation of the U.S. Department of Education that this be done. Policies and procedures are also to be made available to the public under this bill, and that includes student and parental rights, which are defined in FERPA. Much of these requirements in this section, and the next section also, the data security planning, come from recommendations from 3 publications. They are the Data Governance Checklist from a group called the Privacy Technical Assistance Center, which was created by the U.S. Department of Education strictly to advise states and districts on privacy issues.
Representative Cordelli, could you refer to it by line so that we're in the right place? I know
Oh,
on
I'm sorry.
page 2.
Sure. On page 2, line 22 on down,
Thank you.
and then going over to data security planning on page 3, line 9. Those 2 sections, those recommendations are from these 3 documents that I'm mentioning. The second document is Basic Concepts and Definitions for Privacy and Confidentiality in Student Records from the Institute for Educational Sciences. And number 3 is the Guide to Protecting the Confidentiality and Personally Identifiable Information from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And you have a small packet probably on your desk. And that also, the first section, I go through the bill and footnote sections. You see a 1, 2, 3 next to each section, and on the last page, you'll see the footnoted where I got that information from and where the recommendations are from, as well as copies of the documents section by section. And if you want any more information, I also have CDs available. So those are the 3 primary documents in terms of security protection that I drew the information from. There is also a section on security breaches, which is on page 3 as well. And security breaches are also recommended by the Privacy and Technology Center that any security breach be reported immediately to the people involved, and also posted on the department website, and it be an annual report of any security breaches. Many states do this not just for educational data, but for any kind of security breach from government records. In your packet also, you'll see another reference, reason for the security concerns based on the FERPA relaxation of 2008 and 2011. You'll see a letter written this fall to Secretary Duncan by Senator Markey of Massachusetts, questioning the loosening of FERPA regulations. And 1586 tries to tighten up the regulations and what data can be released and cannot be released. And it's not just student data. FERPA relies on student data, or refers to student data. This bill also addresses teacher identifiable information. I think it's very important that we protect our teachers' confidentiality as well. And in this section, you'll see that there are differentiation made between making personally identifiable information available to nonprofit institutions and profit-making institutions. For nonprofits, you can release the data, my bill says, but only with written consent. In FERPA now, there is no longer a requirement in most cases for written consent. My bill also goes a step further with saying that under no circumstances will personally identifiable information for teachers or students be released to a profit-making corporation. I think that's an important distinction. We have had bills, hearings, and testimonies about smarter balanced assessments and securities in relation to that. My bill also tries to address some of that and maybe take into account some of the other bills that we have heard, and I think there's a subcommittee on 2 bills related to the assessments. In consultation with the Department of Education, we built in some room for validation of the assessments. A large unknown right now is how is Smarter Balanced, how is anyone going to validate who is sitting at that terminal taking that test? It's an unknown right now. Is it going to be name, unique people identifier? What information is going to be required by Smarter Balanced to validate? Because remember also, they've got a period of 12 weeks in order to take these tests. So this is a large concern, and we put language in there based on consultation with the Department of Education that there wouldn't be any personally identifiable information provided to Smarter Balanced except what was required for validation purposes of who's taking the test. The last section, dealing with privacy, and that is primarily on page 5, student and teacher privacy, defines on lines 9 through the middle of the page, on line 5. This really relates to what I mentioned earlier with the Common Education Data Standards. This is all information that was built into the Common Education Data Standards that I think goes beyond educational purposes. There is no reason for that information to be collected. So I specify that information in here. And I'll just point out a couple of things. In consultation with the Department of Education, student birth information, we put some restrictions there. And also family income. There is a line that I have in an amendment that didn't make it into this version of the bill that needs to be added so that family income can be included in the department's database for the purpose of defining eligibility for various programs for the student. So that I have that in an amendment to be submitted. The next section, starting line 27 down, addresses various things that are going on around the country that raised privacy concerns for me, both relating to students and teachers. And I thought we should get out in front of this. And so basically the approach I took was not saying that school districts couldn't do things like installing video cameras in classrooms for the purpose of teacher evaluations. And that is being done. I've got documentation in the packet. There's 120 schools in Tennessee that are installing robotic cameras and have an automated system for teacher evaluations based on videotaping of the student, of the teacher in the classroom. So the approach I took was these types of things, the local school district can do it. I'm not saying they can't do it. I'd prefer they didn't, but if the school district wants to do it, They have to have a policy, they have to have hearings, they have to get consent to do this from any impacted people. This is going on in my daughter's district in Texas. They're installing, she's a special ed teacher, life skills. They're going to be installing under a grant from the Gates Foundation a robotic camera that will monitor any noise in the classroom and point the audio and video to that and record that information and use it for the purpose of teacher evaluations. But there is no consent by the teacher. And how about the students in the classroom? That's my concern. No one knows how long these videos are going to be kept, who's going to see them. So I think that that's something that we have to pay attention to. You'll see things like in line 32, what's called effective computing. And I refer to a document in the package here that defines that. There's all sorts of things that encompass effective computing. One of them that's going on are galvanized skin bracelets. Under a grant from the Gates Foundation, approximately $1.5 million, there are universities going to be pilot testing this year the use of galvanized skin bracelets in middle schools to monitor students' reactions to things going on in the classroom. I think that is very intrusive, but in the bill, if the local school district wants to do it, they have to have consent and a policy. So that's the approach that I took with all those issues. And one last thing I'd like to point out on page 6, lines 15 on down, is that the Department of Education should be included in the state's Information Technology Council so that they get together with the other members of the council who are, have information technology provisions within the department, and also that the Legislative Oversight Committee receive any data security plans from the department, as well as any security breach information, so they could come up with recommendations for future legislation possibly. And with that, I thank you very much, and we'd be glad to answer, and hopefully you'll have some questions for me.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Representative Span.
Oh, thank you. I have a plethora of questions, unfortunately. You may know I'm very concerned about privacy issues. But I'd just like you to clarify for me, and maybe for others, what it is that we think, what harm we think would come, or what use would be made of student academic or testing information. I can see why we wouldn't feel that in any way should any biometric or personal or family information be available to the public. What harm would come of finding out that a student's grade point average, for example, or a student's test scores?
Individual students, I would look at it more on an aggregate basis. For a school, for a grade, for a class, aggregate information, and making that available to researchers, etc., is permitted under FERPA, and there is no restriction on that in this bill. It depends on who you're releasing the information to, the test scores and so forth. I know as a parent, I wouldn't want my son or daughter's test scores in probably math released to the paper or anybody else, or my test scores for that matter. You know, I'm not sure if it does a harm, but I think it's a privacy concern for individual students in that regard. Aggregate data is no problem.
I'm looking at page 5, line 9. The department shall collect or maintain any of the following data in any student database. was looking through your definitions, and I didn't see what you meant by student database. Is that a collective database, or would that be an individually identifiable database? For example, I can see that it might be very advantageous to collectively know what students' attitudes about sex behavior and attitudes might be in terms of designing your health programs. And there are other kinds of things like that would collectively be used.
Right. In terms of student database, primarily I'm referring to the state longitudinal database, the large database that they're building based on the federal grant. Excluded from that, in consultation with the Department of Education, I excluded, there's a special ed database they have and a couple of other databases that I excluded in the definition. I think there are other provisions that I did not get into with surveys and so forth, where they might be collecting those types of attitudes, and so I didn't address that in here, and I do have concerns about that, but I think there are other federal statutes that relate to requirements in order to do, and permissions required in order to do surveys that would capture that kind of information.
Yes. So do you feel that we need to better define what we mean by student database, so that we know whether we're talking about a collective database of all students, or whether we're talking about data that is identifiable for a specific student?
I think it primarily refers back to the first page, line 21, the state longitudinal database, and what's underneath that definition. Perhaps the definition needs to be tightened up in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Brandon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you for
Before I
asking.
start, I want to commend your efforts on this. It is an amazing piece of work. I have a question of clarity in our discussion here, and correct me if my perception is correct. At the local level, for local data, et cetera, there are already statutes and policies in place. Am I understanding this statute correctly? Because I want to focus on what this bill addresses. This is for Department of Education level information, and not whether or not a school has this information or that information, because I believe anything they send to the Department of Education, that is somewhat regulated already. It's what's done with the data that's at the Department of Education that we're concerned with.
Thank you for the question. Yes. What is done with the data at the State Department of Education, who it's released to, and even beyond that, if it's released to A for, let's say, Smarter Bounds, what they can do with it also. That's my concern.
Thank you.
Further questions for Representative Cordelli? Representative Myler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I have 3 questions. Follow-up, Representative Grenier. This would not preclude local policies to include, for example, juvenile delinquency or criminal records or medical issues that the school district may need to have just to provide services for the student, correct?
Correct. And I think in the future, I would like to take a look at medical records and HIPAA, because there are issues with HIPAA and FERPA, and one instance, in what instances HIPAA regulations regarding privacy of medical records come into play with FERPA, but that's a future.
Second question, can you define, I'm not familiar with the term predictive modeling. Can you define predictive modeling for me?
Yes, that is, and there was a section in here toward the back, referenced by number, but predictive modeling is where we really get involved with the term data mining. Digging deeply into these databases to determine, for instance, how long does it take a student to respond to question A? And what might that signify when you also look at their score on that section of the exam? Predictive modeling, using that those data mining techniques to say, this third grader might have a problem graduating from high school, or this student might have behavioral problems down the road based on that data mining, those data mining techniques. I think we get into a very gray area when we try and use that data to predict a personality down the road for a student. I know with my children, I would have not liked to have had the school predicting where they might be, 10 years later based on looking at some test result or some survey result.
Thank you. Finally, you made reference to Smarter Balance.
Yes.
Where is that in here?
This section on assessments. I'm sorry, I think it's on the bottom of page 4, but it doesn't refer to Smarter Balance per se. It's just general in terms of assessments.
Oh, okay.
I didn't want to lock us into, one particular assessment, and the issue of that there would be no confidential information related to the teacher or student supplied to any assessment firm besides what they need to conduct the assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Cordelli. Could you help me out on page 5, please? Student and teacher privacy. You've indicated that we're going to be looking at some of these special medical areas in the future, but I am concerned that did you, in your talking with Department of Education, address the issue where there is a need to communicate with Health and Human Services and share programmatic information and specific data regarding a child who might be talking about Medicaid, we might be talking about psychological condition, or mental health, which is a special ed area. I'm concerned that I don't want to see limiting our ability to help a student through language that we have here saying this data, database shall not include, and insurances are oftentimes talked about in school when we're talking about a youngster in special education services and through Medicaid, etc., and especially with Health and Human Services.
Thank you for the question. In consultation with the department, we did talk about that, and I specifically excluded special education database from that. Maybe that addresses your concern.
Does it also, a foster child who may not be special ed, but we're talking about Medicaid support, etc.?
I don't think I have anything in here related to foster care or any information sharing between departments. I don't think there is anything in here at that point that permits that or doesn't permit it.
So would that be something that we need to follow up and work on a little bit and try to look at language to help this type of child that is a foster child or is under the custody of the state?
That could well be the case, and I would like to look at additional instances where a department might need to share information with other departments, and maybe where they don't, so that we can limit that to what is absolutely necessary.
It also works with corrections.
Yes.
But it's very sensitive.
Yes.
Further questions for Representative Cordelli? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And I would ask those of you who wish to indicate your support or opposition to this bill, if you would so sign. Otherwise, I will not open the cards. I will close the hearing and in 2 minutes open the hearing, the continued hearing on House Bill 1508, but we're going to get our materials.